What up, folks? It's Dave. I'm here with my good friend Carl Kenny, and today is another episode of Let's Rap. On Let's Rap, our hope is to unite Black Durham around faith, spirituality, housing, justice, family life, sexuality, and having our voice decide what we want our world to look like. I met Carl about 10 years ago, and he's a pastor, he's a filmmaker, he's an activist. He's someone that has written for multiple columns. He's working on a film around Black liberation theology. He's led multiple congregations, and again, on this show, we're sitting, I'm a student pulling up a chair, we're learning about Black voices through Black history, through Black experience, and we're humanizing our experiences. So today, we're gonna jump right in. Carl, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, and so off the top, what has got you gripped the most today?
Yeah, I think that this is one of those aha moments where we're having to pause to reconsider a lot of our assumptions. This is a transitionary moment. We're seeing responses to Black activism that are different. You know, and the question we have to raise is whether or not we respond to that. How do we respond to it? Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm looking deeper into the question of spirituality. Mm-hmm. As I engage in my work as an advocate for all people, LGBTQ, women, people with alternative learning patterns, different types of ableness, there are a variety of things that I'm advocating for and writing about. But for me right now, I'm just wanting to look deeply at the mental health of Black America. Mm-hmm. And what I'm thinking really about is how so much of our work is dug into our spirits and creating a kind of mental health shift that just ain't healthy, mm-hmm. that we're not healthy as we look at the spiritual of people who are doing the actual work, who've been doing the work. We have to pause and just take care of each other. We need to do a different type of self-care. Mm. So as we continue to press, we have to own the fact that where we are as a community when it comes to our mental health is not to measure that in relationship to how white people respond. I think so much of what we've done is to do that. Mm. That we've been pressing to get a response, sort of like an affirmation from white people. And the way we engaged in the civil rights movement was to put our kids in front of the crowd like a human sacrifice, and to put our women in front of the crowds like a human sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Our bodies were being beaten. We've been bitten by dogs. We have our kids that we put out there pressing through during crowds to go to school. And we see all those images. If you just go back and look at the pictures and the videos of what Black people have experienced, just to get white affirmation, we have to ask the question: what has that done to our psyche? And in many ways, we're continuing to do that. Right. Having to put our very life on the forefront, willing to die for our community, and that's a little different than what white people experience. A part of privilege is not having to fight. Okay. I did a sermon called No Mas, where there comes a point where you don't want to fight no more. But truth is, we have to. We consistently have to fight from a very early age, where we have to have talks with our kids about how to handle yourself with police. And I've just really been thinking a lot about what that means to the psyche, the spirit of Black people. Where are we when it comes to how we see ourselves in relationship to how white people see us, how we see ourselves in relation to how we handle ourselves with each other, how Black people relate to other Black people. So much of it is now forced to be questioned. We even have to think about our systems. That's right. What it means to be governed by a capitalistic system as a Black person. So a lot of our assumptions about our institutions, even our churches, has to be re-examined in the context of what it means to be people who are really dying spiritually around how they think about themselves. And when I talk about spirit, I ain't talking about how you know Jesus. I'm talking about how you see yourself, how you see your neighbor. How we see our identity.
That's right.
Right. So that's why I've been, just really thinking a lot about the spirit of the black person.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's keep taking that. Take us into that world. So, and I know you were trained around mental health work. So that's kind of
yeah.
Right. And some. I know you've done some work in regards to. Was it in those systems? What has been some of your experience?
Well, my theological training is black. Well, I'm a black liberation theologian.
Gotcha.
That's what I claim.
Gotcha.
But I've also done some work in substance abuse.
Substance abuse. That's right.
Yeah.
I was trying to.
Yeah. That's some work in substance abuse.
Okay. I'm thinking about Michelle Obama, and again, follow me where I'm going here. When Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high, right? And so again, we just had C.T. Vivian and John Lewis pass, and so some of what I read in what the article you just put out, I've had these conversations with my wife, and the cost that she's paid as a black woman to be in a space that censors her, and how growing up, again, we're in our mid-30s, thinking about these two worlds of like this model of social justice that gives yourself as a sacrifice, right? And so love John Lewis, hero, right? So this isn't no shade at all, but I think that conversation, it feels different from my generation when it comes to let someone hit you, and and I literally watched trainings around some of the freedom fighter work and how they would respond to being bit, to being struck, how they would make eye contact to kind of convict consciousness, right? And so it was different. And so I think, with all due respect and honor, I think when I hear, like we talked about, Michelle Obama was like, when they go low, we go high, and this like reverberation of like, oh yeah, this is how the ancestors did, this is how civil rights did. So then, from conversations I had with my wife, is like, but look, we came through a different way. Right. And so it kind of says, well, is that the only way to fight, or can we resist? Yeah. And so I think it felt like when it comes to the human sacrifice, I hear and see and feel freedom riders in that. And the cost, and again, they moved mountains and it got a lot done, but then it's like, okay, how do we transition and right, when you have, that go high, go low, and it's just like, it feels like, all right, if they go low, we're like, all right, we got to go lower. If it's an eye for an eye, we'll bring out the seeing eye dogs, because we're about to all lose our eyes, So
I think so much, and in the piece I just wrote on my blog, I think so much of what we have here is rooted in theology. Okay. So the civil rights movement, as we knew it, was structured by religious leadership, and primarily male leadership. So you have your C.D. Vivian, Abernathy, King, Jesse Jackson, all of those were like theological leaders, and even John Lewis, studied in Nashville at the seminary. So they all trained under white theological, evangelical theological premises, and part of that is the biblical model of sacrifice. That's right. You're a martyr, you become like special, you're saintly. And so I think so much of what we have in that model, that Christian model of human sacrifice, is done damage, because what it creates is this psychosis where we continually having to fight. Okay. So even in what Michelle Obama says, it's the terminology of a boxer. So at what point can we just stop fighting, right? And also in fighting, understanding that what ultimately that means is you may die. I mean, what are you letting die in the quest for that? So I think what happened, what I learned when I was on faculty at University of Missouri, in the School of Journalism, and at the time I was writing columns for the Columbia Missourian, and also consulting the then president of the University of Missouri system, who was kicked out by the students. So I'm in this unique place where I have the ear of the system president, I have the ear of the university chancellor, and I have the ear of the community around what's taking place on our campus, where they pushing for massive changes within the system, right? And I wrote a column, and I think it really gets at what you're saying. I wrote a column where the system president was in the homecoming parade. Okay. And I was leading another group, of a group called Race Matters Friends that I was part of. We were marching in the parade as well, just to symbolize to the black students that we're here for you, we're supportive. And the group called the Concerned Students 1950 stopped the procession of the homecoming parade, blocked it, and pulled out their bullhorns and started yelling at the president. And it started this reverberation of activity that led to Jonathan Butler going on a hunger strike. It became a big national story, right? And so the president calls me in and he says, "Carl, I didn't know what to do." He said, they stopped me and I was like deer in the headlights. If I got out of the car and started talking, they said, "I'm not listening," right? If I sit in the car and did nothing, they say I wouldn't care. I didn't care. So I didn't know what to do. So I wrote a piece about it. I said, what do we do when we find ourselves in a type of conflict where we don't know what to do, what's the next step for moving forward, right?
That's right.
And the students pulled me aside. So you have a group of the members of Concerned Students 1950. One of them is former football player, defensive lineman, University of Georgia, graduate students, big old guy. I mean, big and very, intimidating.
Okay.
And they push me against the wall. And they say to me, "Don't ever speak for us again," right? And I'm caught in this kind of unique place where all of it comes to me. It's like all coming back. That it hits me that I'm part of the generation that believed in a certain type of activism, right? And what we saw in many ways, is what we were taught to think, because of our Christian ethic,
sure,
right?
Yeah,
this whole concept of reconciliation in the kingdom of God. It's all come together, people, right? What we saw was the power would be in just being on the same page. What we saw was, just get in there and create change by your being present.
Yeah.
So it was about getting right people in those positions. So we celebrated every time the black person entered into a place of prominence.
Right.
It became like a chair in the community. Oprah's a billionaire, right? And so every time it happened, oh, Serena. Everyone was like a victim for the community because that was a symbol.
Right.
We were looking for symbols, right? And it hit me that these students were looking for something different. So we have been trapped in the symbolism of change. They were looking at the institutional change. They were looking at the fact that the system, in fact, was messed up. They're looking at institutionalized racism. They're looking at white supremacy and the impact. And so they came with a totally different kind of paradigm. And I found myself in that moment at a difficult place. Because what does it mean when you find yourself juxtaposed against your past idea and a future possibility? And it wasn't that I was wrong, and it wasn't that they were right. We were both right. There was truth in both.
That's right.
And the truth that I was able to present was a history, right? But the smart thing to do is to learn by the evolution of ideas that is partly a result of what you were able to provide. So it's not a fight against each other. We make it such, right? We make it into like, young people need to sit down and shut up, respect their elders. Or we make it about those old people don't know nothing. They the reason why we here, right? And in many ways, both are disrespectful, right? Because the truth be told, that what we experienced was out of necessity. What we experienced was because we didn't know any different. We didn't have any other models. We have been enculturated to think that the only way to win was to fight. So that's all we knew. So nonviolence resistance is all we had. And you got to take in consideration that what happened with nonviolent resistance is on the heels of something very similar to now, right? That is the lynchings that took place in America all the way up in, well, even now, they're taking place now, but the massive lynchings that took place in the 1950s, from World War II or World War I, will go back even far from Reconstruction all the way up to the 1950s, and these massive lynchings that was part of the embedded pain of black people. What we see now is law enforcement, right? It's similar. But the difference is what happened then was, lynchings that were taking place and they were being celebrated.
That's right.
I have a colleague who was with me at the University of Missouri named Berkeley Hudson, who has the collection of all of the pictures that were taken by this famous photographer when he was a kid in Jackson, Mississippi. They would call for a lynching, and they would call this photographer, and he would take pictures of it. And they're pictures of these families of community just standing there in front of this lynched black man or woman, right? That was part of what they did. They took pictures to document it.
Right.
And he has these pictures. And so you think about what that means to be a part of a community that was surrounded by people that were willing to participate in that kind of activity. When I was pastor in Missouri, I pastored an all-white congregation. And one Sunday, old white gentleman who came forward and said, "I remember when niggas and jigaboos couldn't come to church." Right? I'm the black pastor. And at that time, my locks were, and I had my earrings in, and I was massively more physically radical. I was more intimidating with my radicalness than I am now. What I try to do now is be more intimidating with my words and my appearance, so they don't see you coming. It's camouflage. But and he came back to me a few Sundays later, because I just went on a rampage with my brutal revolutionary stuff. I don't care if y'all white. I don't care. I never said it's atomic bomb time, man. Right? And this guy comes up to me crying one Sunday, right, and hugs me and said, "Reverend," he said, "Pastor, I've seen some things in my lifetime that I can't get out of my head." And I thank God that God sent you to me so that I can be reminded that I can still be loved by God. This guy's in his 80s. And what he saw in his head was his daddy took him to the lynchings. His daddy took him to the lynchings, and he had to watch it as a kid. That's in his head, right? God. And he couldn't get it out of his head. And then we talked about that. And so when I looked at my colleagues' pictures, and then I'm looking at this young man named Jim, who's in his in early 90s actually. That's the way they live their life. And I thought, thinking, how do black people feel? What's in their minds with that kind of activity? So when I think about all of that in the context of what you're asking me, right? You're asking me this question about, well, what do we do with the nonviolent resistance stuff? Yeah. To me, the conclusion would be we got to re-examine our theology, because the theology created the culture for that kind of idea.
That's right.
And I'm not so sure that's the right thing to do.
That's clear, man. That gets at it. I think. You mentioned violence and black community experiencing violence, and then this violence that it feels like a good segue to speak a little bit about when we talk about Durham, right, back home, and we talk about, and it's in my mind, it's fresh. So you at the vigil last week for Tavion, and so you've been to dozens like that in Durham, sadly. So that is, again, part of our narrative, part of our experience, and there's a national, global, and then there's this local level conversation about spotlights that come out, and they're like, okay, we're doing this again. And so when you think about black on black crime, I think about Tamishia's son, right? And it's intimate, it's personal, but then you just gave us context. And so I think I want to take this moment to say, how can people that are viewing our community understand the instances of violence that are in a space that are claiming then to have been violated? Right. We have been, and so that's facts. But then there was three maybe news crews out, that were filming, that were pulling that footage in. And so there was narratives that are coming out of that space, right? And I'm glad the awareness is coming to attention, but you and I both know there's the other side of that where the political side is like, okay, let's beef up our policing, let's beef up our response. And so take us into that for those watching that see that even black folks, people are asking us, say, hey, we can't say Black Lives Matter if they don't matter here. Unpack that for us.
I think the conflict we have in our spirits right now is that we don't know how to speak to it.
Okay.
There are no real words spiritually that help us speak about what's taking place in our streets, right? So what we do with that is we talk about the economic, variables it created. We talk about the gaps, these gaps created, and we can look at history. We can see what's happened. I mean, if you just do the history, you know what happened.
Sure.
I don't like to use the terminology black on black crime because I think it's dog whistling for some people, because it sends out the narrative that the black people are more prone to kill each other, and there is some of that there. But I really believe what we have here is that we don't know how to talk about this.
Thank you. Yeah.
We don't know how to talk about it. So, I mean, even saying that, it's like, well, but it's obvious that black folk killing each other, but we don't want to say that because white people think, and so everything is convoluted in this difficulty around how do we speak about it?
Right.
How do we talk about what's happening in Chicago?
Right.
Where it's so bad that the mayor is talking about working with Trump to bring in some federal troops, which is crazy to me, because we already have a militia mentality.
What's going on in Portland?
But we don't have the language with this, right? And then you have the thing that is really absent right now. I really believe that we got to look at the death of spirituality.
Right.
The death of a credible spiritual witness around empowering young people to think about themselves as bodies that matter, right?
Yeah.
Because when you create a scenario where people have no other solution, what you get is what we're seeing. Yeah. That's spiritual, right? It is economic, but economically, black people have always struggled, right? Economic disparities are part of our witness from the very beginning of our life in this country. I mean, economic disparity was present after Reconstruction. So we have something here that's a little bit different, right? And there is a sense of accountability that comes to that.
Yeah.
How do we talk about accountability that doesn't necessarily need to be rescued by white people?
That's right. That's what I'm getting at.
So in a lot of our answers, that's the assumption there, right?
Yes.
So we need more money for this. We need more police. We need more this. All of our answers are rooted in white savior kind of terminology that in many ways takes the power away from ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
So I see this as I think this is a situation that we have to save ourselves, right? That there is a place for collaboration with those who are in power politically, but really for me it's deeper than that. There's something at the very core of the human psyche, which goes back to what I've been talking about the mental health piece, that we are a people that are really strapped with a severe mental illness created by racism. So I talk about how racism created a mental state for black people, and there's no place to go to fix it. There's no therapeutic model for it. So that for me, that's what we're dealing with. We need to come up with new terminology to talk about this. And locally, we need to spend some more time on different kind of options. Right now, I'm incensed about the response to it all, because it's like every year, it's the same thing. Last year, it was Zion. Little boy killed. 15, 20 years ago, it was Shekinah Hotwater, who was killed in the old a few gardens. Standing on the porch, 4-year-old kid was killed. We know this story, and we know the rhetoric around it. We know the politics around it, but it's the same old stuff. This goes nowhere.
Painful, and it hurts to not have an answer. And I think when it comes to us being human, and I want to get into these concepts around spiritual awakening, we're a spirit people. So again, for me, I feel like I'm 20 months, and I've been saying this before, I'm 20 months I've been decolonizing my faith for 20 months. And so feeling like someone that was drinking from a toxic pool, right? And it's still been in my system, right? And so I feel like when I think about faith response, when I think about churches, outposts, people in the spaces doing cookouts, trying to connect, trying to get people saved, born again, and we're talking about this 10, 15, 20-year history, thinking about how we respond to that brokenness and that pain with hope. There's some compromise there that we gotta talk about the history there of what that's looked like. And so to me, it feels like there's reckoning to do around faith response to violence in our community. And we've missed at some level. It has missed, I have missed, we as a community of faith people have missed how to handle those moments. And so here's a question. Why does, when I say spiritual awakening, I mean being born again, conversion experience, why does it feel like when someone experiences spiritual awakening, it seems to make them less human?
I challenge definitions of what spiritual awakening means.
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
That's the first thing.
Okay.
When I think about the black faith, I'm not talking black church, I'm saying black faith. That black faith exists in this country for the purpose of protecting black people's soul. The reason we were organized, it was a counter voice to white evangelical ideas. So when the black folk went down to the brush arbor, they were redefining what they heard, right? And they were there to protect each other, right? To protect their spirituality when they were being told, you're less than white people. They went down to the brush arbor to remind that they're not. They actually better than them, right? And so if the black faith exists for the purpose of protecting the soul of black people, the self-esteem, the dreams, the desires, the hopes, all of that, right? The heritage. You know, we exist as a community to do all of that. To create a world, an ideal of what it means to be made in God's image. That after overcoming enslavement, that you have the power within you to go out from enslavement, to build businesses, to build families, to inspire your kids. That's the purpose of the black faith tradition. It's become something totally different than that. It exists now as a cosigner on white evangelical thought. So this idea of being saved, you know, buys into that idea that black folk ain't good enough. They need to be saved from something to be different. And what is that? They need to be more like the white people. White people in this country say they worship Jesus. They worship whiteness. They worship white supremacy. And Christianity is used for the purpose of making that a reality, right? We're better than y'all. Now, if y'all want to be like us, you got to act like us. So I think that's part of what we have here. And I think a lot of the kickback when it comes to the church right now is because I think people have become really aware that the very premise of it is really digging, just like taking parts of their soul, and they're fragmented now. I mean, what do you do when you begin with the premise at a very young age? I'm not good enough, right? I'll tell you a story. I remember coming out of high school, smart kid, right? I'm living in Columbia, Missouri, which has a population of black people at that time was like 4%, right? My experience is I've never really been in classrooms with more than 5 black people at a time. So my whole existence has been to prove that I belong in those spaces, right? That's it. You got to prove. You know, I didn't have the advantage of an HBCU. I didn't know what that meant in the mid-Missouri, right? So my entire existence is like to prove that. And so when I come out of high school, I had internalized that I was not good enough to go to college. I had the grades to go. I wasn't surrounded by people that had achieved like that. My whole spirit was, I'm not good enough to go to college. right? So what I do? Sell drugs, right? Get caught up in that life because I'm not good enough, right? And I think about that a lot.
Man, I appreciate that, and it really makes me think about. Let's get into the Black church. Let's get into Black expressions of spirituality. And let's go past some of these boundaries that are there because of whiteness and Christianity. Okay, so let's take us back to the faith that our ancestors would have practiced in captivity, right? Coming over here, being ripped out of their homes, their lands, their faiths, everything, their villages, their culture, their traditions, all of their worship. And really, I think about the first face I see and think about is Nat Turner, right? And so the rebellion around him being, a Baptist minister trained, right? And so at some point, and here's my question, at some point he would have had to look and say, you know what, I'm gonna rebel against this pastoral clergy that own us, right? That train me, that affirm me. I have to rebel and almost slay these people that are slaying my people. That was a switch, right? And he would have had to reject major parts of the theology at the time that was keeping him oppressed, right? And so take me into that.
I think it's important, Gayrod Wilmore's book, Black Religion, Black Radicalism, is like a must read for anybody who's concerned about how Christianity is a white man's religion. Right? I think it's important that we realize that throughout our history, there have been strands of radicalism in the church. I see a major shift in the Black church after Reconstruction. Because the church became a way of helping maneuver Black people into white culture. So that's where the shift happens. Pre-Reconstruction, the Black church, it was held as a counter voice against white ideas of Christianity. The genius of the Black church is the fact that what the Africans did in coming to this country is they took their own ideas and merged it with what they were allowed to do. So as critical as people may be about what the Black church has become, I think it's also important that we actually praise those slaves for giving us something that held to our African rootage. So there are things within Black religion that do that. So the way we worship, the shout, is, and you see it best in voodoo. Voodoo is a merging of Catholicism and African religion. I think it's important that we recognize that all throughout the history of America, there have been pastors, there have been churches that were not molded by white evangelical ideas. You see it with Nat Turner, you see it with Gabriel Vassie, of all of the insurrectionists, they were like taking scriptures and then using it in a different way. That's why James Cone's work is so important. Because of James Cone saying that this is actually the theology of the slaves. This is the theology of Black people that is distinguishable from what white people think. That's right. Having served in a white congregation, let me tell you, it is not the same religion. Right. It is. It's not the way we think about it. It's a survivor kind of theology. Right. Now, what we become is a lot of what we are has been co-opted by passivity. It buying into this idea that you want to find God, you got to become white. There is that there too, but I think we got to be critical of any idea that Christianity is nothing other than a white man's religion, because there's too much in it historically and in contemporary space. We look around the country, we find that the Black church is continuing to be the protector of the Black identity, and we have to own that for what it is. True. So as critical as I am about how white theology pops up in the way we think about God in the Black church, I also have to name the fact that there are places where Black theology is a savior of Black identity, and we need to own that too. Yeah, absolutely. How do we see that experience through the 1700s, 1800s, going into Reconstruction after emancipation? Like, how can we, and again, I think about this in my terms of kind of decolonizing, and I was at an all Black church. I had went through being at a Black church, thinking I needed,
than starting in a black church and feeling like, white folks had better theology, had experienced all of that. But I think what does that, and then went back knowing that no, there was white supremacy in that, but then even realizing even another layer of black church forcing an assimilation and forcing this multicultural milieu that mutes us. Yeah. And so I think I was triggered in a black church, all black church, woke church, that love the people there, still do, but I think my mind was like, all right, there's censorship happening because we're playing to a base that sent you, right? And they're white. Right. And these folks you don't want to go too far because then you have to indict. Right. So help us as viewers, and me as a student, understand in this moment as we see folks that, because I think Trump being in office illuminated a lot of when we say Christian, what it means, right? And so for folks that have abandoned, speak to folks that have abandoned, that are done, they're like, I can't do that. I've been working in those conversations. I know you have, but what does that mean to connect to the spirit, right, of the creator of the universe, the one that molded you, right, with all our genius, all of this, we know it didn't come from us. And so for folks that need hope, right, that need life, that still need joy, that still need spiritual formation, what does that look like now?
What does that look like? Okay, well, first of all, for me, I have to make the distinction between my love of the teaching of Jesus and my relationship with the church. Okay. They're not the same thing. Okay. The church is the institutionalization of the teachings of Christ. Right. So with that in mind, I preface by saying that because the question we have to ask when it comes to forming a spiritual base, if it's Christian, if it's Ruba, whatever it may be, you have to ask yourself the question, what is the purpose of your involvement in a spiritual quest? Mm-hmm. What is it you're looking for? If you can't answer the question, I mean, you just want to memorize some scripture, right. You want to be held accountable to some dogma.
Why are we there? Why are we doing it? Right.
Yeah. So what is the question? Mm-hmm. What is it that you're actually wanting to achieve in your spiritual quest? Okay. In my journey, I discovered that it's very simple: freedom.
Freedom.
The freedom to be loved by God, to love yourself, to love others. And to exist in a world where there are no limitations. It's to be free. And anything that comes against that, any kind of teaching that hinders my ability to be free, has to be questioned. Because in my reading of the teachings of Jesus, his purpose was to do just that. He came into the world for the purpose of introducing the people the possibility of not being restricted by their own teaching.
That's right. That's exactly what we're going to do.
So it's about freedom, right? Yeah. So if that's it, then everything I represent has to be about helping people access their own freedom. Yeah. And the contradictions that exist. So when I talk about the devil, hey, what is that? People talk about the devil. I think it's some say it's a white man. Some say it's a black woman. Whatever it is. But for me, it's a spiritual contradiction. Yeah. So whatever it is that is in me, as a possibility, as a God-given possibility for my life, right? Whatever is in me that can be manifest if I just cling to the possibility that's that's there. Anything that contradicts that is the devil. It's a spirit of contradiction. So that's my spiritual journey. Okay. For me, they're helping people to understand that you are free to be you. Yeah. And that any teaching that contradicts that, I've got to say, wait a minute, are you free? Yeah. So that shows up in a lot of different ways, right? Yeah. It shows up with women. Mm-hmm. It shows up with gay people. Right. It can show up with young people in these streets who are feeling that they can't achieve because they're black. That's right. And it shows up in a lot of different ways. Right. So everything you having to preach is about liberation. Black liberation is about liberation. It's like changing the normal way of thinking about what it means to be black. We're not inferior. Yeah. Truth be told, we're superior. Right. But for reasons that have to be taken and taken into account what it means to be a part of our own history. Yeah. So for me, that's it. The question is what it means to be free. Right. What it means to be free. I do not like to participate in any conversation or movement that marginalizes any sect in the group.
Yeah.
Like anyone in the group who's being questioned as being less than the other. Mm-hmm. I don't want to have that kind of conversation. So any movement that wants to hold men superior to women, mm-hmm. or straight people superior to gay or lesbian, right? Or any population, anyone who says that we're better than you because God loves us more than you, right?
Yeah.
Then I have to question that, because ultimately what you're saying is you're not free to be like the others.
Yeah.
So for me, that's the spiritual question, is about freedom.
Okay. And I'm rocking with that. So I'm the guy that grew up being a habitual backslider, right? I mean, probably dozen altar calls, dozen backslid. So hearing what you're saying, it resonates with me, because I'm like, there was a point where I didn't feel like God loved me because I didn't do this thing, the way that so-and-so. And my experience started in the black church. So I think this is, for me, now let's really look at the inner community conversation. And so when it comes to not being saved enough, when it comes to being born again, and when it comes to feeling loved by God because you have said the sinner's prayer or you've been baptized, and all the variations of that, right? It's exclusionary. It excludes us from the love of God.
Right.
For me, I think my biggest war since I was 19 with clergy, with leadership, with this, is it's like, and in the beginning, I felt like, okay, I got to put on to get on, right? I was this fakery that I felt falsetto. But then at some point in my mid-20s, I transitioned. I was like, wait a minute. If we're creating an image of God, that means that before and after and in the midst of and during and at the end and the beginning of my life, God was calling, beckoning, loving, giving. And so I started tearing down those walls. The more I tore down those walls, the more it got me in trouble with church leadership. Because I'm like, oh, my man out here, he got it. And they're like, whoa, God will accept him when he does this thing. And I'm like, no, I accept him now. And so I think the beef for me with clergy started when I'm like, whoa, hold on a second, time out. I thought I wasn't because you guys made me think that I was inferior because I didn't have, and as I got it and I took the theology, I'm like, hold on, Jesus didn't even move like this. God didn't move like this. And matter of fact, he didn't even say this.
So let me ask you, what's the thing missing in that? I mean, there's something deeply missing in that interpretation of the walk of Christ. It is the most important piece to the teachings of Jesus that we leave out.
Give it to me.
It's grace.
It's all grace.
I had a professor of theology at Duke who used to tell me the ultimate theological question that you have to ask is who's doing what to who and why. Okay? So it's what are we doing to each other?
Yeah.
Is that more important than what God does for us? So the question is, what is God doing in us?
Yeah.
Not what we need to do to prove to other people that we deserve to be in that space.
That's right.
The question in your grappling has to be the grace.
Yeah.
Where is the grace in that? You know? It's very important to do that. And so there's no place for real grace in the church. Right?
No,
we are holding people accountable to an idea.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is this term in psychology is called reaction to formation, you know, and we see it a lot, and you kind of define it, and that's that the human condition where we're engaging in activity that contradicts what we say we are.
Yes.
And then we like brutally speak against that activity so that people don't figure out that we're doing it. You know, it's a game we play. It's a game we play. I mean, I've got 9 women, but I'm trying to say to my people, be faithful, you know. And so it's that kind of that's a defense mechanism.
But see, Jesus came to remove that veil, though.
Well, Jesus comes to set us free to engage in a life of faith without being defined by our limitations.
Come on.
And so when you're no longer defined by your limitations, then you're free to become something different. So if you're walking around say, I ain't worth crap anyway, so you know I might as well keep on doing it.
Right.
I can't fix it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not good enough to fix it. When you remove that whole pressure around your limitation, you're free to become a different person. That's the piece in the message of Christ that a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
Is that the freedom of being you and being loved as you.
Yeah.
Without condition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is another part, within the way we think theologically. We talk about being loved without condition, but we put like limitations of what that looks like.
Yeah.
What it means to be loved without condition creates the space for you to become a redefined human being.
Completely
Redefined. The redefinition is in your acceptance of you being a different person.
That's right.
You can't get there until you you come in and say, fix me. You're going to be fixed every time you go to church.
Yeah.
At what point do you accept that you're fixed? So for me, that's the trap that we or what we've done in many ways is we connect redemption to economic classification.
There you go.
And so you have people that they're looking at that, right? Mm-hmm. That the Lord don't bless me unless I got some kind of manifestation of God's physical blessing in my life.
Yeah.
So we see prosperity as the authentication of a spiritual walk.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, God don't love me, right? We need a theology that embraces poverty. Right?
Yeah.
The poverty, God is present in your broke mess.
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah. God is present in all of that.
Completely.
That God isn't handing out the blessing to prove that you're special.
Yeah.
In fact, the matter is a lot of people who have those kind of physical blessings, those kind of material blessings, are away from the blessing of God.
That's right.
But we can't see that because we make that correlation. And we use scripture to prove it.
That's right.
Which is an invalidation of what Jesus talked about.
Yeah.
Jesus coming into the human history and talking about the last should be first. We chip in that, right? Mm-hmm. We make it all something different. Yeah. So that's part of we talk about a spiritual quest.
Yeah.
It's what it means to say to a person, you're good enough, bro.
That's right.
But I'm no, you're good enough, bro.
Yeah. When I caught that, everything changed. That Jesus, oftentimes, and it was so visceral for me. Preach that oftentimes I would literally be accused of going up a heretical tree. And what happened was it felt literally like, oh, I'm actually articulating a different gospel because of how it handled grace, how it handled mercy. Hearing and seeing and understanding this picture of a parable in the Bible where a man finds a treasure, what the kingdom of heaven is, finds a treasure, buries that joint, goes and sells everything, comes back and buys it. For me, I saw power that was given, a treasure that was seen. And so for me, I saw the beauty of creator interacting with creation and finding value in something that connected us to it, that we could put our life into. And so I separate the imperialism from my theology. I separate the colonizing, right? Because even for me, then when it hit me and I realized this is how God sees us, He presents Himself to us as something that gives us tremendous treasure and value and gives us power. And to where we become this cheerful, it becomes this joy experience exchange. So He left with glee. He left with joy, like, yo, this is everything. And so I think, it's a snapshot. It's a parable of the kingdom of heaven. But for me, that emotion and that mix, I rarely experience that from people within church leadership. The way that I read it and felt it, and how God, in my own quiet time and personal time and intimate time with God, raptured me over that verse, and how it helped me love my family, be a better father, a better leader. It changed everything for me. And so when I preached it or I've communicated it, I know often I've meant a different thing than the people that have trained me to see the theology.
Right.
And so let's take this back. I'm going to take the conversation back to, did you attend the Bimbee Fest last year?
Yes.
Okay. I've had this conversation on and off, right, in the last year. So there was a guest, Juvenile.
That was there.
Right, okay, that came. And so there was, let's preface it for the viewers that don't know. So Juvenile came and he was expected to perform. Now, I'm 84, baby. My wife's 80. So Back That Ass Up was gonna be played.
It's got to be.
It's gotta be played. Okay.
You can't invite Juvenile.
Okay.
Back That Ass Up.
So this is the conversation I want to have, because I felt like it was a moment for us to see us in a way that I knew instantly, and not that day, but I knew because of, the mic was being muted. I had friends that were like, oh, we're going there, we had kids. So everyone's like, everyone that grew up on Juvenile now has babies. We got kids, right? And so for me, my wife, we went to boogieing. My daughter's doing her thing. So I know there was people that started to leave. I know there was people that wanted to mute him. Started to mute his mic, whatever. And, it kept, people were, but here's the thing. My dad's from Cote d'Ivoire, right? 4 hours, he's from a village 4 hours outside of Abidjan. And so I've seen video from that space, that place of body movement, hip, right? Hip, like twisting, popping, jiggying, boogieing. That to me is pure joy, is pure us. And so when I grew up dancing, learning dance, it makes me think about how I grew up before I even knew a lot of those traditions, because my dad was in our house. We were dancing like that. We were pop locking, we were moving like that. And so for me, this is a contradiction, right? So how can Juvenile make us move like that, but somehow we're shamed?
Yeah.
And say it was a word, say it was a context, but it didn't necessarily. So that moment for me was particular because I'm like, oh, here we are. Yeah. In one context, you could have it and it not be a sexual connotation, but right here it's like, well, so take us into what feels like, for my generation, like, well, shit, you guys are listening to this at home. Right. I had a conversation with a friend on the show just recently that was like, hey, a lot of those aunties and uncles and so got Juvenile in their playlist, but they're not going to play it out publicly. But here's the kicker. I don't feel like when it comes to a David Bowie, a Ozzy, Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, any rock and rollers, right? I don't know if we would have that same shame with a lot of their. So take us into that contradiction in our community. It's complex.
It's complex.
Help us to understand
the ultimate theological question with the juvenile issue: how can we embrace a person in the totality of who they are?
Right.
How do you embrace a person for who they are? That's who he is.
Right.
Okay, you don't invite a person to perform knowing who they are.
Right.
You ask them to be somebody different.
That's number one. Right. Yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
And the other part of that is the people who came, they know who you are. So they come to participate in an activity, knowing that part of your repertoire is back at ass up.
Yeah.
But when it happens, you respond to it as if who you are isn't a proper place. It's not a proper person. That we have to hide this. The question is who we hiding from.
Sit in that.
So you're sitting in a place where you're asking a person to be totally different than who they are. Not only you're asking that artist to be different, you're saying that I have to be different too.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
That's not being authentic, is it?
No.
Okay. So there's a dishonesty in that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we have to ask ourselves what it means to be a dishonest person.
Right.
So as a parent, as a parent who knows who he is, right?
Yeah.
Who was offended by what he did, and I was there.
Right.
I get it.
Right.
I would suggest to you keep your kids home.
Right.
So I mean, those are the kind of questions that when you
naturally,
look, is what does it mean for you to like affirm a person who they are?
Right. Yeah.
You accept them for who they are.
Yeah.
You understand that, like you, they're going through a journey.
Yes.
That this is a person who made a living, who became a notable person.
Right.
In being that. And now you're asking him, years after he became that person of notoriety, to become a different person.
Right.
Is that fair? Now, your expectation is for him to be different. Where's that coming from? Your demand that this person be a different person.
Right.
Is that coming from your place of spirit? Is that like God don't want that to be heard in a public place?
Yeah.
God don't want the kids to hear it? You bought them. So I think those are kind of questions that we have to ask about that, right?
Yeah.
You know, there are places where I go, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna go because of who I am.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And because I'm free to go.
Right.
I'm going because I'm a minister.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I want to go in those places where I can say to people that, you know, this is okay for me
Yeah.
to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Because I'm able to measure it in a different kind of way. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I see.
I'm not saying to you back at ass up, because
right.
you know I don't need you to do that, because I've evolved as a human being.
For sure.
But I'm here to witness to those who, you know.
Yeah.
What I mean?
Yeah.
So those are kind of questions, you know, you go deep here. What are we
Yeah.
saying about to a person? We kind of force them to be something they're not. I mean, what are we really saying? What we saying you're not good enough.
Saying we don't.
We're judging you
value
in those moments.
That's right.
And what are you saying that you showed up and you expect something different from that person? So that's a real dialogue. And I mean, where we come out on that is, it can go, you go different ways with it.
Yeah.
You know, we can talk about, you know, the Word of God. You do all that.
Sure.
But we need to at least begin with that kind of conversation, right?
Yeah.
In other words, why are you there?
Yeah. That deserves a community conversation.
It
because I feel
deserves.
like we touched, and this is part of my last part I want to land on. We touched the old heads, the sages, right? Bimbee Fest has deep history, right? And so for me, it's like, yo, a lot of like honorable brothers and sisters, gray hair sages are there, completely there. And so it's like, but at what level did they feel disrespected? Right, with the audible whatever that is, I can't hear it, it's devil's music. Okay, cool. But it's like then there's this whole generation that they're like, I can't touch them, feel them, see them, hear them. And here's a moment to where at least I'm third. I'm in between, so I'm like, all right, I can get with this. A bunch of kids, I was like, oh, they look to Juvenile as an artist in like this catalog of hip hop is like kind of this old head, right? In a lot of ways, the 20-year-olds don't, you know, they kind of look to him as someone that's like a post generation, right? And so for me, it's like this was a beautiful moment to connect.
Yes.
But then it turned into like, oh no, we wanted the movement, we just didn't want the audio. Right.
Well,
and so
there's also something to be said, because this happened to me with Juneteenth too.
Okay.
You know, when I went to Juneteenth,
at the Hay Time?
No, this is the one last year.
Okay.
I didn't go last year.
Okay.
Where I look out in the crowd, and I'm counting like 5 black communities in one space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Durham is not one black community. No community is.
No,
they're like different black communities. You got your revolutionaries. You got your educated, sophisticated. You got your church people. Then you got your hood folks. Right? You got all of that in one place. And I'm looking at that, and I'm witnessing how the artistry shows up in that space. Right?
Yes.
And for me, oh God, that's a celebration. So for me, I'm looking at Bimbee and I'm like, this is what it means to be black.
Yeah.
You know, and why is it we can't, you know, I think there is something to be, there's something to celebrate in the totality of our blackness. Because we are a monolithic cultural people too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and every art form in every American art form is a derivative of something black folk did. Country and western, blues, bluegrass music started with black folk, hip hop started with black, jazz starts with black, rock and roll starts with black people, R&B, all of it. Every black musical form comes to the belly of a black person, right? And when we come to those kind of places, we can look and say, look at what we done did, right?
That's right.
And for me, that's what I do, right? I'm going into spaces to celebrate the totality of what it means to be black. I'm not trying to force everybody to be a certain kind of black person, right? Because you know, I understand y'all coming from different places, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're raised in different places, and you embrace different ideas. I'm not wanting you to talk like I talk.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah.
They're gonna be some cuss words up in there.
Yeah.
I'm not judging it.
Right.
That's part of the culture, right?
How can we do better understanding those above us and those below us in this context?
I think it goes back to what we said before. That part of the goal of white supremacy and colonization is to make black people white, right?
Yeah.
Ideologically, culturally, intellectually white. If the goal of colonialism is to make black people white, we got to say that, right?
Yeah.
Right. And what we're doing in this place is we're trying to adjust people's behavior to fit what we believe is more white.
Man, incredible, and I really appreciate that insight. It's so important for us in the show to be able to communicate to the young, to the 16-year-old and the 66-year-old, and make this a conversation that, for me, brings a lot of honor, reverence, respect, seeing us in our place and state and condition, and fully being able to love without limits. And so I love the hope that you've given us. I love the direction this conversation is going. For those that listen, keep tuning in. Hopefully this will create a series of community conversations. So what we like to do is give our guests the last word. And so if you would give us your heart for Durham.
I think the lesson of our conversation, it's been a great conversation, by the way. I think the lesson is that we need to do better in affirming the totality of the Black experience. You know, that we are not a monolithic people. We are multi-generational. We are a people of multiple cultures. You know, we own Black culture. American culture is Black culture, and I think it's important that we learn how to just celebrate all of that and evoke in the spirits of people that God loves you as you are, and become a better version of yourself. You know, that's it, right?
That's right.
Well, spirituality is becoming a better version of your already existing self. And therefore, anybody who's in relationship with us, if they're not helping you become a better version of you, they don't belong in that space. So that's my concluding word for you today.
Thank you, brother. That's the journey. Guys, this has been another episode. Let's wrap. Peace.